Here we are with another book thingy. In this case, it's another lender. And whether I say it's a keeper or not, I don't want somebody spending money to get me a copy of it. That's just my way of reviewing them. I probably will not ever get to my keepers simply because, well, we hope that I don't last all that long. Ignore the face, there's a video about that. Okay, so this one, my notes are getting bigger and bigger. I feel like I'm almost doing kind of a study in Heinlein because over the years, he certainly has been one of my favorite authors, and just has such a large body of work, etc. That I do find myself, sort of delving into his psyche, where things are similar, where they're different, etc. And in this one, it's different. I call this different from other late Heinlein books, but I think I may have gotten kind of on a bad start there because sort of the first, and for a long time, the only late Heinlein book I read was The Number of the Beast. It actually was, I think, being serialized, at least partially. I don't know if they did the whole book in there, in Omni magazine, which was really a beautiful magazine. I don't remember. I think it was put out by Penthouse, essentially, but it was like just this beautiful science fiction magazine. Unlike other sci-fi magazines, it was done all out. Great pictures. It had some consumer reviews for tech items and stuff like that. But it was just really, really interesting. And they would serialize some stories. And Number of the Beast was, I think, in there. But I may not have gotten, I was only subscribed for a year. I had bought a couple of issues and then subscribed. And then kind of decided it really wasn't worth the cost. But that I've looked up and is really considered sort of one of if not the worst of his stories. However, I had gotten an impression from that, and I think another one, maybe Friday, I don't know, I can't remember what. I thought maybe this one was similar, because I have read this before. I could tell immediately by the beginning of the book, I was like, yeah, I remember this. But this may have been the book that I was reading at the time a sort of catastrophic event happened that forced me to move, and it was somebody else's book, and I maybe left it there with him. I wouldn't have taken it. So I may not have made it through the whole book. Anyway, the main character is significantly different from the main characters in most of his books. In most of them, they're kind of I don't know, they feel kind of like Heinlein, in terms of they just seem to hold a lot of his views already, although maybe not as strongly expressed in some cases. And you can go all the way back. A Stranger in a Strange Land is a little weird there because the most main character is not of that cloth. It's Valentine is a different. He's not really an everyman in that sort of way. But if I'm thinking about, the way that things like Time Enough for Love or I Will Fear No Evil, or even in Number of the Beast, the way the characters react to things has this sort of feeling of this 50s almost caricature of how men and women react and interact and whatnot. And this was very interesting because this really was a religious fundy character to begin with. Although, as the book progresses, he starts to become more like the template Heinlein character. Sometimes quite swiftly. It doesn't tie into the prior stories in the same way that that Number of the Beast and at least one other of those later books, and I don't remember what else I read, pushes into, where he's meeting characters from other stories and all this, that, and the other, and trying to tie everything together. That was the worst part of Number of the Beast, maybe, because it wasn't really a standalone story. It was really more of a kind of way to bring all these characters back together that never belonged together in ways. But it does actually have this sort of multi-dimensional feel to it. Now, when you get to the end of the book, it's different from that. Number of the Beast has this, he's jumping around through dimensions. It feels like that's what's going on here, except it's all Earth. It's just alternate history Earths. And in fact, the one that the main character starts in isn't our Earth, which is kind of weird too. So like everything kind of, sets you on this teeter-totter, and you kind of expect him to show up at the real Earth, and he may have at some point or another, or the Earth that we live in, he may have at some point or another, but it's never absolutely clear, and everything seems at least a little different. Now, like I said, the character does slowly become more like a normal Heinlein character in terms of attitudes and whatnot. And a loosening of attitudes seems to happen to a lot of the characters. Maybe not the earlier ones. Again, the ones from the 70s or whatever feel like they've got, more of an openness immediately, an acceptance of these kind of weird things that Heinlein just kind of believes, which is some libertarian type, a lot of libertarian thought, real libertarian, not like post-80s libertarians, but kind of my body is my own, this kind of free love type thing kind of permeating through it all, that, it may not be fully polyamorous or anything, but it comes awfully close, maybe as close as you're willing to, in terms of, obviously stranger goes further than most, but in terms of, everybody, all the men and women kiss each other passionately, and it feels almost like a cover for things, but it's not like he's absolutely shy and saying, hey, they ended up having sex. That's clear if it is, and if it isn't, and there are times in all of these where these characters don't have sex, but you kind of feel like they probably should somehow, in his view. I don't know. But he does end up working those norms that he had in before. So like the relation between the sexes. Once the main character finds his real love interest, he's already married and in a totally different type of relationship. But once he finds his main love interest, he starts, threatening to spank her and shit like that, for, disagreeing with him in public. But then again, it's also that female to which a man can, be that connected with or whatever is always right somehow. That's always a weird thing of it. Because you have this kind of patriarchal type of concept in the relationship. That whole, you'll do what I tell you, woman, but it's like, not really. And then also some exploration of this kind of anti-jealousy type side of things. Certainly with the kiss everybody, on both sides, not male on male, of course, because he probably wasn't in that. Something I forgot about that showed up in some of his earlier books kind of gets hinted at here, which is a playing with incest. It turns out it's not actually, but you don't find that out until a lot longer in the situation. But you basically have a little place where a wife is basically telling her husband he should bed his daughter. So yeah, there's that. I did find some places where the main character was inconsistent and where some of the information about these different worlds ended up inconsistent. I think in one case, the main character was familiar with cars, and in another, he had never driven one. Just little stuff, but when you're trying to keep together such a big shifting of different realities, kind of, is maybe more excusable. And then in the late part of it, the apocalypse comes. Now, the main character is just being thrown from world to world, and this is sort of, his great test or whatever, it turns out. It's not clear that we're talking about Job here particularly, but with the title, you're thinking, this is his great test, and it is. You wouldn't want to misname something in that way. But anyway, there was something almost satirical about the Bible thumper way in which he gets, in which the rapture comes for him. And then you go to heaven and hell, and similar to, there was a little piece about heaven in Stranger in a Strange Land, which felt completely out of place. But here it's just baked in. This is what the story's heading for, right? Now, at earlier points, and I wanted to hit this, there were hints because his love interest is although supposedly a modern woman from the 1990s from a particular world, she's kind of an Odinist. She believes in the whole Norse mythology, and was born as a Christian but rejected it, right? And in the apocalyptic moment, the main character believes they're both raptured and eating bars. And then he ascends to heaven and can't find her. And at this point, I'm thinking very much we're looking to something like omnism, speaking of Omni magazine, which is sort of this belief that all these different religions are actually true in some sort of way. And we'll get further there. But he travels around heaven, finds out she's not there, gets himself, he ends up being a saint and all that, but he gets himself thrown down to hell. And now, heaven and hell are both kind of satirical in and of themselves too. Heaven is sort of this, I don't know, obnoxious kind of bureaucracy, but not that terrible. I mean, it's not like, mind-numbingly bad, but all the same, when you're dealing with the officials there, it's particularly that way. And in hell, he's kind of welcomed with open arms, set up with a prostitute, essentially, who he has a long, maybe 1,000-year relationship with. I don't know. And at least at the beginning, he's like, oh, am I cheating? I don't know. And he thinks to himself, how would I feel if she, his love interest, was in this kind of relationship? And kind of walks away with an I don't know, as opposed to. And now, I did the one Glory Road where there was just sort of the, let's just put those external relationships to the side so I don't feel jealousy. That feels kind of like where he comes from across all these. That's why I say it's not really polyamorous. It's more like, yeah, what happens happens. And in Stranger as well, I think his name is Jubal, is like, and I've heard this from other characters of his. Yeah, the wise man kind of forgives his wife her indiscretions and that kind of thing. As long as she doesn't like nail it into him and make him hurt for it, just because it's that. So yeah, I touched on this before. There's basically this character arc. He goes from this real born again Christian, and I was really actually impressed with Heinlein's handling of that, as that character gets tempted, but that's not part of his trials or anything like that. That's just setting up his trials to give him a love interest that he cares about, as opposed to his wife, whom you don't really meet until very late anyway. And, in the end, it ends. I'm not going to go into it. It's a fine ending, whatever. But yeah, again, both Heaven and Hell are really kind of satirical parodies of the story there. Nowhere near as interesting as like the a book that I will bring up often until I actually, and maybe even after that, until I actually review it, because I need to reread it to do that. And I haven't found it in my piles yet, which is Terrain in Hell, which is just this beautiful, like, the whole Paradise Lost being put forward from a more critical and analytical eye, but with reasons for the fight between heaven and hell, essentially between the devils and the angels who remain loyal. And in the end, it does have that omnism in a sense. It's not like all religions are really true or anything. It's more like they all kind of exist and have their own afterlives for the people that they are. And there's something over them that's more of a god than the god that whatever a religion is believes in. And it's just, I don't know. It feels a little like it falls flat on what could it go to there instead. And I mean, other than portraying the Judeo-Christian God as the absolute shit that he obviously is, if you read, the Old Testament at least, or Revelations, I mean, trying to fit either end. I don't know that it really has a hell of a lot going for it. But the thing is, it's Heinlein. He writes well. He writes well. He draws you into the stories. It's interesting. And it's a fun read in that sort of sense. I wouldn't be looking at it for any kind of great philosophical insight, except into, along with, all of his other works, into his own weird kind of view of how things should be. One that I don't particularly agree with, although in some places it's a little adjacent to things that I do believe in. Anyway, I think it's worth reading, and I'm glad I got an opportunity to read the whole thing or read it again. I'm not sure which. It was absolutely obvious to me when I read the beginning of it. It opens up with this fire walking scene, and I'm like, I have totally read this before, but as I got later and later, felt like I hadn't. So I don't know. But yeah, I think it's one that's worth doing. And this, I think, is his last book. He dies in '88. There might be another one. This is 84, so you might have had room for another one. I don't remember. I don't remember when Friday showed up. I saw it first at like 80, in 85 or 86, so that may be after this. But yeah, so there you have it.